Just to me, having schizophrenia and major depression, it's just like any other illness. It's just not visible, and I don't feel the stigma so much of having a mental illness, and a lot of that's because I've met other people through NAMI that has helped me gain strength and helped me kind of release that. I had a lot of barriers within myself, and I had to overcome a lot of stigma within myself. And I know there's stigma out there with others. I've experienced that with other professions and like licensing agencies. But I think the biggest stigma I had to overcome was just the fears within myself.
Right.
Me, like the symptoms is, I feel like my brain is like in a loop. It's really difficult to focus. And so it takes a lot of intention to focus on activities. So it can be physically exhausting because there's a lot going on in my mind. I have a strong, supportive family that's been very helpful. But I think for a long time they didn't know what to do about my mental illness or how to help me. I think they did the best that they could. And I think what I would say for family members out there, sometimes just helping out in practical ways, like giving somebody a place to stay or giving them clothes when they're in the hospital, or just helping out in practical ways and just not giving up on them can be a very helpful thing.
It sounds like you've had a...
It's interesting how life takes its turns, and I've gone through anger management, so I know how to deal with my feelings and how to, that I can't control other people's responses towards me or other people's actions, but I have full control and full responsibility towards how I can react. And so that puts me in a power position. Also, he's remarried now, and his new wife, their kid's stepmom, is phenomenal, and we are actually friendly towards each other, and we're able to have a good relationship towards each other. And we've, as terms of my ex-husband and we've put our differences aside and just decided we're going to make the best that we can and raise these kids together. And I've taken co-parenting classes where it's not okay to badmouth the other parent in front of the kids, but you just have to focus on making letting the kids have a good life.
That's wonderful.
It only affects 1% of the population. It doesn't discriminate with race or gender or ethnicity, socioeconomic. It's 1% of the population, and you'll find it in all different groups and sectors and but it is rare, and there is a genetic component. So my children are, they might have mental illness. Well, I do have one that does have mental illness, but I don't think it's the end of the world to have schizophrenia. I say to people, it may slow me down, but it doesn't stop me. I've been able to accomplish a master's degree in business with a 4.0 in 1 year. That's one of my feathers in my cap, but at the same time, I think yeah, sure, it slows me down, but I think when people think of schizophrenia, they think of like somebody homeless on the street, and sure, maybe that person does have schizophrenia, but it's not a death sentence. You can still have a great life and have a mental illness like schizophrenia. Crazy and psycho, those are schizophrenic, those are labels I don't like to hear.
Right.
I think I try not to let that bother me. I try to put on a good show in terms of like my appearance so that I don't look like I'm crazy, but it's an invisible illness. And so I think that's what I want people to know, is that mental illness is an invisible illness. You can't see the distress somebody might be going through necessarily.
Right.
I've had access to what I need, but it hasn't always been in a way that I feel is dignified. And that's because of when sometimes health situations or a mental health situation intersects with the law, there's like incarceration there involved, and I don't feel that that's a dignified way to be able to get treatment. Unfortunately, it's a direction that my life has taken taken a turn. Some of it was an insurance issue because going through a divorce, I didn't have funds and I couldn't afford insurance and it got dropped. And there's that interim period when you're trying to get disability or Medicaid or whatever, and you're kind of in limbo. So I spent a period of 8 months in jail, not all at one time. It was like 3 months here, 2 months there, maybe 1 week stay there, where they would be adjusting my medications. And I think that that's not a great way. Putting those officers as like in the position of healthcare providers isn't fair. It's not fair to them, and it's not fair to the person that is receiving those services. So I've always had what I needed. In terms of housing, I have family and friends, so I can always couch surf. So I've never been homeless on the street. I'm very thankful for that. I have an ability to get along with people enough that they'll take me in for a period of time. But I think the medication piece and making people in law enforcement be healthcare providers is not a good way to go. I don't think law enforcement should be an answer to any kind of healthcare problem, and mental illness is a healthcare problem, and it can be a healthcare emergency. So that would be my answer to that. If not, I wish I would have been more trusting of healthcare providers and of like groups like NAMI. I didn't even know about NAMI until 5 years ago, which is kind of surprising because I was in the healthcare field, but I was always taking care of, like, I was in critical care, so I was like taking care of small babies or people getting out of surgery. So I would have tried to prompt my college self to say, hey, don't let things get as bad as they sometimes did, because I was in not a good place mentally many times. I would be suicidal, and I just kind of just powered through it as best as I could until I had to go back to the hospital and get put on everything. But I think I would have tried to tell my young self to seek out other people with mental illness, because they provide experiences and stories that one can learn from, and there's strength there and wisdom there, and kind of almost like a shelter there too. And it helps with feeling normal. I like to tell people some of my self-care tools are: you never want to get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. It's HALT. It's an acronym. So that's some of my self-care tools. Make yourself a priority. Make your health and your wellness a priority. Also, I practice mindfulness, so just learning to be present and to have gratitude in the moment helps me with positivity, because I think I was negatively slighted before, and that had a lot to do with me becoming suicidal, was because my thinking, I had stinking thinking, is what one therapist said. I was just slighted towards the negative, and I had to learn, if I can find one thing to be grateful for, if I found one thing, it would change the way I thought, and it could change the way I felt. So I was actually able to combat my depression with just changing the way I thought, and that was like mind-blowing to me, that I could just change my thoughts and it would change my mood, and I wouldn't feel like this dark cloud was over me. So those are a few of the skills that I've learned. The nature of mental illness is to isolate a lot of times, and I think that, yeah, I think I felt very lonely and not in tune with. There was a part of me for the longest time, for over a decade, that I didn't want to share with people because I was ashamed of it. And then when you realize there's so many people that have similar experiences, it's really eye-opening, and it can be very empowering.